The first really comprehensive encyclopedia of natural history, published in Italy at the very end of the 16th century, has an excellent detailed section on dragons. They're properly classified. There are six-legged, four-legged, and two-legged, but with a pair of wings. Then there are those that breathe fire and those that don't. The author, Ulysses Aldrovandus, was clearly in no doubt about their reality. What were they? Well, clearly they were not crocodiles, nor were they water monitors, those huge lizards that can grow to 6 feet long and can be very formidable indeed. Both seem pretty good candidates, but they weren't dragons, because people in the 16th century knew all about these creatures, and Aldrovandus includes relatively accurate sections about them in his book. So I suppose that we must write off his reports of dragons as perfectly rational attempts to turn travellers' exaggerations into terms of flesh and blood. And indeed, dragons disappeared from natural history books within a few decades of Aldrovandus writing about them. But then, 3 centuries later, in 1910, they reappeared. Reports came from what was then the Dutch East Indies and is now Indonesia, of a population of gigantic lizards, far bigger than any other species known, living on a tiny island called Komodo in the far east of the archipelago. And the popular press decided almost immediately that they, after all, must be the long-lost dragons. In truth, the Komodo dragon is only a slightly larger version of the water monitor, to which it's closely related. Initially, there were claims that it was immense, 20 feet or so long, but the biggest actual specimens that anyone managed to collect, alive or dead, were only half that length. In the 1950s, I was a young television producer looking for suitable subjects. As far as I could discover, there was no film of the Komodo dragon, apart from the rather fragmentary record made by the American expedition. Why shouldn't I try to film it? But when Charles, my cameraman companion, and I got to Indonesia, no one in the main island of Java seemed to have heard of the animal. Eventually, however, after some uncomfortable encounters with whirlpools, smugglers, and getting nearly shipwrecked on a coral reef, we got to Komodo. To be honest, the dragons seemed to me to be quite docile. They were, of course, pretty impressive. 10 feet long may not sound much, but as one prowls towards you, the sun glinting on its grey, shiny scales, and its huge yellow forked tongue sliding in and out of its jaws, savouring the air, it seems quite big enough. Even so, I reckoned, I would be able to fend it off with a pole if it got too inquisitive. At that time, no zoo in America or Europe had one of these creatures in captivity. So when we came back, our film created quite a stir. Since then, several camera teams and groups of scientists have gone to Komodo and made long-term studies to try and answer some of the questions that these remarkable creatures provoke. First of all, are the dragons a relict population of giant lizards that were once much more widely spread in this part of the world, monstrous hangovers, as it were, from the age of the dinosaurs? Well, there were once immense lizards living in Australia. Their fossils are quite well known, and some of them were truly gigantic, up to 20 feet long and weighing over half a ton. They survived until around 25,000 years ago. But it's thought by scientists who've studied the question that Komodo's dragons almost certainly evolved separately on the islands where they now live. Second, what do they live on? The answer to that seems to be quite easy. If you want to attract them, as we did, all you need is the carcass of a goat, and the more strongly it smells, the better. But are they only carrion feeders, or do they, on occasion, become active hunters? And are they likely to attack human beings? I asked in the island's only village if the dragons would attack people. Well, they said, one of the villagers some years ago had disappeared, and his body was found in the bush, badly mauled by dragons. But, they said, he was rather old. Maybe he had collapsed and died from natural causes, and the dragons treated his dead body as they would the body of a goat. But then other people claimed that the dragons did actively hunt and were dangerous. They knock a goat or a man off his feet with powerful sweeps of the tail and then set upon their victim. I never thought that this was very plausible, but now it's been discovered that they are indeed killers. Like all reptiles, they take their time. They can sit around waiting for hours and days, and eventually they get a chance. A buffalo wanders close enough for them to lunge and deliver a powerful bite on one of its legs. Severe though the bite is, it's seldom enough to cripple their victim. But their saliva contains a poison. Slowly it spreads through the buffalo's body, and slowly the animal gets weaker. And the dragon waits. It's a reptile. It has all the time in the world. And before long, it manages to get another bite. And then another. And after a week or more, the buffalo collapses. The dragons move in and finish it off. So they are hunters, and they do live on buffalo and goats, alive or dead, as well as on deer and pigs. But there's a problem with this answer. None of these prey animals are native to the islands here. All have been introduced by human beings in relatively recent times. What did the dragons eat before then? This is less easily answered, but it seems that the dragons of Komodo are not just hunters, they're cannibals. Newly hatched dragons, only about 18 inches long, are swift and agile, and they feed on other small species of lizards which abound on the island, as well as rodents, birds, and even insects. But food is short on the island, and they're in danger of being eaten by the adults. As long as they're small, they can escape by climbing into trees where the large, clumsy adults can't follow them. But eventually they grow so big that they have to take their chances on the ground. There, the smaller ones will be eaten by the adults. Only those that grow large and quickly will survive. That may well be the reason why this particular lizard, over many generations, has grown so large. It's a heartless way in which big animals manage to live on insects and other small items of food at second hand, by eating their offspring that are small and agile enough to eat those smaller things. And there is one last question about today's dragons, and one last surprising answer. In recent years, a number of zoos have acquired specimens and have done their best to persuade the dragons to breed. But it's not been easy. Indeed, there have been tragedies. In London, a male dragon was introduced with all the proper precautions to a female who was already well established there. But she didn't take to her mate. Eventually there was a scuffle, the male was badly injured, and although it was rescued, it died. Other zoos had similar difficulties and tragedies. But the dragons had kept one of their secrets until the very last. Females don't need males in order to reproduce. They can lay fertile eggs without any contribution whatever from a male. They are, to use a technical term, parthenogenetic. And what's more, judging from the zoo's experience, the females seem to prefer things that way. Parthenogenesis does in fact occur in other species of lizards. One population of Mexican whiptail lizards, for example, only reproduces in this way. Initially, of course, it's a way for a species to take over a territory very quickly, because every member of the population can lay eggs instead of only half of them. But that success is unlikely to be permanent in the long run. A parthenogenetic female is only able to produce identical young. Only if a male contributes to the genetic makeup of the young will there be variation. But without variation, there can be none of the adaptation necessary if a species is to survive environmental change. And if the dragons can't do that, then the last of them will indeed disappear.